It's February 26th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with President Yoon Suk-yeol's final statement at his impeachment trial. The troubled leader vowed to pursue political reform and effective governance through constitutional amendments if he were to return to duties. The ruling is expected to come around mid-March. A minerals deal between the U.S. and Ukraine will reportedly be sealed as early as this Friday, with U.S. President Donald Trump continuing to brag that his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, wants to ink the deal. And Trump is getting rid of the EB-5 immigrant investor visa program and instead introducing a so-called gold card that people can buy for about $5 million from the U.S. government. President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial has wrapped up after 2 months of 11 intense hearing sessions, with the leader making a political appeal to return to office. Our Oh Soo-young has his story.
President Yoon Suk-yeol said he would serve a shorter term and pursue constitutional reform to reduce executive power to build national unity, dignity and security as he delivered his final argument against his impeachment.
The Constitutional Court held President Yoon's 11th and final impeachment trial hearing on Tuesday, some 73 days after the National Assembly passed a motion to remove him from power following his December 3rd martial law order.
Standing as the last speaker of his trial, Yoon delivered a 67-minute statement to the 8-member judicial bench. He reiterated a stance that martial law was a one-off plea to the people as the nation faced a, quote, state of emergency, largely prompted by legislative sabotage and budget cuts by the opposition party, which holds an overwhelming majority in parliament.
지난 2년 반 동안 오로지 대통령 끌어내리기를 목표로 정부 공직자 줄탄핵 그리고 입법과 예산 폭거를 계속해 왔습니다. 헌법이 정한 정당한 견제와 균형이 아니라 민주적 정당성의 상징인 직선 대통령 끌어내리기 공작을 그야말로 쉼 없이 해온 것입니다.
He argued that he'd kept cabinet procedures required to declare martial law and outlined global uncertainties that require executive attention. Yoon said if he were to resume his duties, he would pursue political reform and effective governance through constitutional amendments.
결국 국민 통합은 헌법과 헌법 가치를 통해 이루어지는 만큼 개헌과 정치 개혁이 올바르게 추진된다면 그 과정에서 갈라지고 분열된 국민들이 통합될 것이라고 믿습니다. 그렇게 되면 현행 헌법상 자녀 임기에 연연해야 할 이유가 없고 그리고 국정 업무에 대해서는 급변하는 국제 정세와 글로벌 복합 위기 상황을 감안하여 대통령은 대외 관계에 치중하고 국내 문제는 총리에게 대폭 위임할 생각입니다.
Still, the leader apologized for the confusion and inconvenience caused by his martial law decrees. This comes as the ruling People Power Party endorsed constitutional revision to shorten the 5-year presidential term, as removing Yoon from office would prompt a snap election, which would favour the opposition party. If Yoon is not impeached, he would resume his duties immediately with his term ending in May 2027. National Assembly Impeachment Panel co-chair Chung Chong-le said in his closing statement that the public has already rejected Yoon and urged the court to uphold impeachment.
President Yoon took the oath of office to uphold the Constitution and defend the nation. Yet he sent martial law troops to invade the National Assembly and trampled on the Constitution. The respondent no longer has the qualifications to remain as president. He is no longer the president in the hearts of the people.
During the 2 hours assigned to each legal team, the Assembly's panel also emphasised its grounds for impeaching the leader, arguing his martial law order was illegal and unconstitutional in both procedure and substance. Yoon's lawyers, meanwhile, continued to defend its legitimacy and legality, arguing that the alleged orders to drag out lawmakers from the National Assembly and arrest high-profile figures had not been given nor implemented. With the hearings concluded, the impeachment trial is now entering its final phase. For now, the Constitutional Court is likely to reveal its decision on around March 11th. In South Korea's past two presidential impeachment trials, the ruling came 11 and 14 days after the final hearings. But one variable that could affect the timeline is the court's verdict on Thursday on a dispute case over acting President Choi Sang-mok's decision not to appoint left-leaning Judge Ma Eun-hyuk as a Constitutional Court justice. If the court upholds the jurisdictional dispute and Ma joins the bench, the court will have to decide whether Ma would also deliberate on President Yoon's impeachment case. This could require more time for consideration, especially as Yoon's side might request a retrial process for the new justice to review and familiarise himself with the trial, pushing back the date of the ruling. Seong, Arirang News.
The U.S. and Ukraine may be on the brink of signing a minerals deal worth $500 billion. Now, the announcement comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is reportedly set to visit the U.S. to meet with President Donald Trump. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States and Ukraine are reportedly closing in on signing a critical minerals deal, which is considered key to ending the 3-year-long war in Ukraine. According to AFP citing a Ukrainian government official, the agreement could be signed as early as Friday. Speaking on the condition of anonymity, the official said that the two countries agreed on the terms of the minerals deal, with government officials from both sides working on the details. The official also explained that the draft agreement mentions Ukraine's security guarantees, but does not explicitly include the U.S.'s role in it. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump on Tuesday told reporters that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to come to Washington later this week to sign the minerals deal. According to multiple sources, Zelensky's visit is scheduled for Friday, which coincides with reports of when the minerals deal may be signed. Trump also stressed the need for peacekeeping troops in Ukraine if a ceasefire agreement is struck. However, Russia has refused to accept any deployment of NATO troops. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, under the former Bill Clinton administration, slammed the minerals deal, pointing out that it's a clear departure from U.S. action in the past. In an interview with Bloomberg TV on Monday, Summers compared the Trump administration's minerals deal to that of the Treaty of Versailles, only it imposes a large sum of payment to the victims of aggression and not the aggressor. The Treaty of Versailles is a World War I peace treaty signed in 1919. The Allied powers, including Britain, France, and the United States, who won the war, imposed a huge war reparation on Germany. The minerals deal, if signed this week, will allow the U.S. to take 50% of Ukraine's mineral and natural resources revenues worth $500 billion. But the deal would include not only revenue from rare earth, but also uranium, lithium, oil, gas, and even some port revenues. The deal also specifies that U.S. companies must hold 50% ownership of Ukraine's rare earth elements deposits. This will allow the U.S. to receive more than 3 times what it was given to Kyiv for its military and humanitarian support in the past 3 years. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So, as Trump touted, it appears Ukraine will sign the deal over U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral deposits. Will the deal be a foundation for lasting peace or merely an unfair bargain? We are joined by Professor Andrew Miller this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, is signing the deal the best that Ukraine can do at this stage? I mean, Trump says Ukraine has no card to play.
Right. So, this morning we woke up and it seems like the deal has been agreed, and probably Zelensky will travel to Washington on Friday to sign this deal. To answer your question, unfortunately, it seems like yes, right now, based on the current situation, this is the best deal that the Ukrainians can get. And really, if we look at the whole picture, nothing much has changed. The Ukrainian position hasn't changed, the Russian position hasn't changed, the European position, Chinese position, and so on. The only major change has been the US foreign policy, which has had a major U-turn. And that means that the Ukrainian government, President Zelensky, has just one question to ask. Can they sustain their own defenses against Russia for at least the next 4 years without US support? And the basic answer is no, which means they're basically being forced into signing this rather unfair agreement.
Well, Ukraine is hoping to be involved in those peace talks that Trump and Putin are carrying out as soon as possible. When do you think Ukraine will actually be invited to that peacemaking talks? I mean, when will Putin and Trump actually allow Ukraine to play an active role in the peacemaking process?
Well, this is a very good question. So far, it seems like the US government, especially President Trump, seems to be dictating everything that is happening. So it's definitely a US-led negotiation that is happening. The fact that we potentially do have this Ukrainian-US deal, it's a good first step. Potentially then the next step would be some sort of US-Russian agreement. And then I think once they have those in place, then they will bring all three together, in which case, then we have to start negotiating the trickier aspect of territory. So as we know, Russia has claimed about 20% of Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainians are still in the Kursk region of Russia. So now the trickier aspect of what territory remains where, that will be when all leaders need to come together.
And this peacemaking process is not just about the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. Some countries, including Japan, appear to be not as proactive when it comes to aiding Ukraine anymore. Is it because of its relations with Washington? I mean, are countries like Japan walking on eggshells?
To a degree, yes. So if we look back for the past 3 years, Japan has been very strong in its support for Ukraine. Right from the very start, it criticized the Russian government, criticized the invasion, provided a huge amount of humanitarian support, financial support, also technological aid. So for the energy sector, which has been very badly hit in Ukraine. In fact, Japan has been, I think, the second largest individual donor to Ukraine, and that's been very consistent. However, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago when I was on here before, Japan, the Prime Minister Ishiba, just visited the US. So it's very clear that Japan also is, nuchibo wiseo, as they say in Korean, thinking about the US relationship as well.
Well, Professor Miller, then what do you think is the likelihood that Trump will urge other countries to chip in to end the Ukraine war? I mean, will Trump demand anything to any countries?
Well, we've been seeing, even if you go back to President Trump's first term in office, NATO was one of his big issues, asking the Europeans to pay more for European defense. And this Ukrainian war, President Trump sees as a European war. And so he's going to very much focus on this idea that any sort of peace agreement will not involve US troops, but it will involve the European militaries maintaining peace, so peacekeeping missions in Ukraine carried out by the Europeans. And already we've seen this week, the United Kingdom government has increased or will propose an increase of its own defense spending up to 2.5%. The newly elected German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, he's also immediately been looking at how to expand European defense spending. So this is really where we can see Trump's sort of issues already starting to take effect.
Well, it can be good news for the Ukrainian people if the war does finally come to an end. Or will Ukrainians not be happy that Trump and Putin are leading the peacemaking? I mean, would you say Zelensky's leadership is at risk now?
Oh, I mean, firstly, we can say that any sort of peace deal, any sort of ceasefire is a good thing on the whole. But of course, if I was a Ukrainian, I would 100% not be very happy that Donald Trump is now favoring the Russians and that really any sort of agreement that comes out, the Russians are likely going to end up as the winners out of all of this. So President Zelensky generally has had fairly good popularity ratings. How that will change if he is forced into signing a very unfair agreement, we'll see how that goes. But potentially, this could be the end for Zelensky.
Right. Zelensky does have a lot on his shoulders. Professor Millard, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
The U.S. is set to end the EB-5 immigrant investor visa program, replacing it with a new gold card system that offers a pathway to citizenship for $5 million. Our Choi Min-jung has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump plans to terminate the EB-5 immigrant investor visa program. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick announced on Tuesday that the, quote, low-priced EB-5 program, which grants permanent residency to foreign nationals promising to invest in American businesses, will be replaced by a gold card system. This new pathway to citizenship would allow individuals to purchase residency for $5 million.
Of course, we're going to make sure they're wonderful, world-class global citizens. They can come to America. The president can give them a green card, and they can invest in America, and we can use that money to reduce our deficit.
Trump has also initiated a probe that could result in tariffs on copper imports. On Tuesday, Trump instructed the Department of Commerce to examine copper imports, and if the probe uncovers evidence of dumping, the administration could impose tariffs or quotas in response. Trump's decision is part of his broader effort to expand his protectionist trade policies. In 2018, he used a similar investigation to justify tariffs on steel and aluminum imports and plans to bring them back next month. Lutnick said Tuesday that it is time for copper to come home, arguing that foreign competition has severely weakened the American copper industry, just as it did with steel and aluminum. Copper is vital for numerous industries, including defense, with the U.S. importing 45% of its supply, mainly from Chile and Canada. Although the U.S. was once the world's top copper producer, it now ranks 5th. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Newly released data in the U.S. shows consumer confidence has seen its largest monthly decline in more than 3 years in February, amid growing concerns over the potential impact of Trump's trade policies. A U.S.-based think tank, the Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index released on Tuesday stood at 98.3 this month, marking the biggest decline since August 2021. It marked a 7-point drop from the previous month and the third straight monthly decline. The Conference Board called import tariffs the main reason for the drop. Now, the Expectations Index, which reflects consumers' short-term outlook for the business and labor markets, also fell more than 9 points from the previous month to 72.9. And South Korea's Trade Minister An Deok-keun is visiting the U.S. to push for tariff exemptions from the Trump administration. Starting Wednesday, An will spend 3 days in Washington, D.C., meeting with government officials, including those from the Department of Commerce. He is seeking exemptions from the 25% tariffs on steel and other items, and he'll request South Korea's exclusion from reciprocal tariffs set to take effect on April 1st. He'll also propose ways to enhance cooperation between Korea and the U.S. in sectors such as shipbuilding and energy. The South Korean authorities are easing their greenbelt for the first time in nearly 2 decades as part of efforts to spur business investment. Our Choi Soo-hyung has the details.
Greenbelt restrictions will be lifted for some areas of the country for the first time since 2008.
For the first time in 17 years since 2008, more Greenbelt land can be released. This will actively support national and regional industrial, logistics, and urban projects.
In the 5-grade Greenbelt system, the government will allow the release of Grade 1 and 2 areas holding high conservation value. These areas were not originally eligible for deregulation, but will be permitted only if alternative Greenbelt areas are designated. With this deregulation, the government plans to attract more business investments in the regions. The goal is to develop 15 key regional projects in major cities across the country, excluding the Seoul metropolitan area. The cities of Changwon and Ulsan, which had a high proportion of Grade 1 and 2 Greenbelt areas, were selected for 4 and 3 sites, respectively. Gwangju and Busan each received 3 sites, while Daejeon and Daegu were allocated 1 site each. More than 10 out of the 15 selected locations will be used for industrial and logistics complexes. The total area set to be released is 42 square kilometers, equivalent to about 5,900 football fields. 35% of that are grades 1 and 2, and the government plans to consider publicly owned land as alternative sites. The total project will cost 27.8 trillion Korean won, approximately $19.4 billion. After the development procedures are completed, the deregulation will proceed gradually starting next year. To prevent real estate speculation, these areas will be designated as land transaction permit zones, meaning any land transactions would require prior approval. Moreover, the government will launch a 1 trillion won fund for 12 national strategic technologies, including semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and advanced biotechnology. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
The nominee for U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Stephen Feinberg has stressed the need to prevent North Korea from advancing its nuclear and missile programs. In a written response to the Senate Armed Services Committee during his confirmation hearing on Tuesday, he warned that North Korea's growing weapons program threatens stability in the Korean Peninsula, in the Pacific, and beyond. Feinberg underscored the importance of strengthening U.S. missile defense, particularly to protect the homeland. He also pointed to China's expanding military capabilities aimed at increasing regional influence and countering U.S. power. And the nominee stated that if confirmed, he would prioritize strengthening the U.S. force posture in the Indo-Pacific to deter China's aggression.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting with the tariff talks between the U.S. and Mexico, as the deadline for the exemption of U.S. tariffs on Mexican goods approaches, negotiations are taking place to reach a mutually beneficial trade agreement. On Tuesday local time, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said discussions with the U.S. are underway, aiming to prevent the imposition of tariffs on Mexican exports. This follows a previous agreement in early February, where both nations consented to a 1-month suspension of tariffs set to expire on March 4th. The proposed U.S. tariffs include a 25% duty on all imports from Mexico. Mexico currently sends approximately 80% of its exports to the United States. President Donald Trump has stated that these tariffs are on time and on schedule to commence as planned. In response, President Sheinbaum expressed optimism about reaching a resolution, but has also indicated that Mexico is prepared to implement retaliatory tariffs if necessary. Germany's new chancellor-in-waiting, Friedrich Merz, is facing significant fiscal challenges in his bid to boost the nation's defense spending. Following his party's recent election win, Merz has prioritized bolstering Germany's defense infrastructure, especially in light of recent global tensions and shifting alliances. Merz had about 90 minutes of talks with outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Tuesday local time and discussed ways to circumvent strict restrictions on debt so he could spend more on the military. There's increased urgency to raise military spending due to concerns over the United States' potential isolationist stance under President Donald Trump and the need for Europe to assume greater independence for its security. However, efforts are impeded by the constitutional debt brake, which restricts federal borrowing to 0.35% of the nation's GDP. To navigate the debt brake constraints, Merz is exploring the establishment of a special defense fund, potentially amounting to 200 billion euros. Meanwhile, in Chile, a massive power outage swept across Chile on Tuesday local time, leaving millions without power. The blackout, which affected 14 of the country's 16 regions, including the capital, Santiago, was triggered by a failure in a 500 kilovolt transmission line in the Norte Chico region. The disruption caused widespread halt of public services, including traffic signals and businesses. Mining operations, the backbone of Chile's economy, were also impacted, with some major sites experiencing power losses. The Interior Minister ruled out cyber attacks as the cause, and authorities are working on recovery efforts.
The temperatures have improved, but with the chill lingering in the air, it still doesn't quite feel like spring just yet. However, as we move through the week, temperatures will climb even higher. However, air quality will suffer with yellow dust, causing dust levels to rise in most parts. The capital regions could see ultrafine dust levels rising to very bad level at night. Refrain from going outside if the level gets too high in your region and keep your face mask handy. Additionally, the dry air levels are expected to remain high, increasing the risk of fires. Please exercise caution and avoid activities that could cause fires. After the highs will be similar to a couple of degrees higher. Seoul tops out at 7 degrees Celsius, Daegu, Gyeongju, Busan, Jeju at 12 degrees. Southern regions will see frequent rain for the next 5 days, while Sunday's nationwide rain will bring more chilly weather back to the country. So don't put away those thick winter coats just yet.
Thank you so much for staying with us this morning. New Day at Arirang will be back tomorrow at the same time, 10 a.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.